Armand here with your forecast for the week of April 14th, 2025. Actually, we're sort of starting this back on Saturday the 12th, and I know a lot of folks watch the forecast on the weekend before, and you'll get a little bit of extra if you start watching it on Monday or even Tuesday. You get a bit of a recap. That's okay. The reason why I'm starting it a little early, well, the planets don't exactly follow a weekday schedule and the energies blend from one point to another. And the weekend, the 12th, the full moon in Libra on the 12th, kind of sets the tone for what's coming in the coming week. And actually, the coming week sets the tone for what's happening next week. And that's a very big week. That's a big deal. Now, this week is liable to be kind of a big deal, too. I think I said early in the month that the celestial activity in April was somewhat less tumultuous than in March. And literally speaking, that's true. We don't have quite the number of earth-shattering events. We had two eclipses, we had Neptune going into Aries, all happening in March. Some hot aspects and so on. In April, most of the aspects that are really important to us, on the collective level at any rate, most of what's going on is working with the stuff that's already taken place sometime during the year. Right, we can go back to the beginning of the year. You'll see me go back to the beginning of the year in just a minute. And what we're doing is working out, and in some cases, I think, coming to the conclusion, the end of the chapters that started earlier in the week. It's not the end of the book, but it's the end of the chapter. And not to say that, the conclusion is something that is a resolution. It might very well be a revolution, but it is probably about stuff that's already on the table. And I think you'll see that too. So on Saturday, we do have the full moon in Libra. This full moon is, among other things, very close to the planet Eris. Eris, the planet of discourse, and it's a full moon. There's a degree of lunacy. The sun is in Aries, and Aries is getting a lot of attention right now because Neptune has moved into the sign. And so our perceptions about things are a little bent out of place by the Neptune and Aries energy. It always expands things and sort of makes things bigger. And this full moon, full moon lunacy, that's going to be in place. It's in the sign of Libra. Usually we would expect a little decorum there, but Libra is Venus's sign, and Venus is stationed to go direct. That's the other thing that happens on Saturday. Venus ends her 40-day retrograde that began on March 1st. Okay, so we would think now that the retrograde is over, well, I would think, well, now the retrogrades are over. Mars was retrograde, and that ended back in February 23rd. But he's not out of his shadow yet. And Mercury was retrograde. That was from March 15th through April, I want to say 7th. And that's over, but he's not out of his shadow yet. And then we had Venus retrograde for the 40 days, and she's no, she's barely moving. And in fact, Venus is stationing to go direct, essentially conjunct Saturn. Now, Venus is in Pisces, which is her favorite sign, and that's good. But then there's Saturn. She's sitting right next to Saturn. It's probably not Saturn's favorite sign, Pisces. Well, Venus is values and valuations, and Saturn rules falls. And if you've been taking any look at any economic indicator over the last couple of weeks, you know that there have been some real tumultuous falls going on. And that Venus is stationing to go direct does not really do much to ameliorate that situation. Here's an interesting thing about that. Venus conjuncted Saturn for the first time before her retrograde on January 18th. What happened around January 18th? You had the inauguration. Then, during her retrograde, very recently, on April 7th, Venus conjuncted Saturn. And what happened last week? Ooh. So set the tone, set things up on January 18th. Got the big message, let's call it, on April 7th. She's stationing to go direct on April 12th, and she is going to cross over Saturn again. They're going to meet up again, and that is going to happen on, let me get it for you, April 24th, during the all-important week of that week. The last week in April is packed with things. So, story kind of began in the third week in January. The big fall happens on the next meeting in on April 7th and the days around it. And the final meeting, and so the end of that chapter is on April 24th. It is not time to go out and do things that have to do with buying luxury goods or speculating on anything. It is not a good time for it. Even in relationship, I would say probably new relationships would need a little bit of a break. In existing relationships, there might be, you already know what that situation is, and if there's any issue with it or so on, you'll probably wait till the 24th to get the answer. But um, essentially, we could say Venus's retrograde extends a little far forward for each of us personally. Venus has to get moving. Technically she's turned direct, but she doesn't really go anywhere. She's stopped. Um, so hold off a little while on any Venusian kind of activities, just as you want to hold off a little while on mercurial activities. And that's another thing that is happening this week is that Mercury is going to meet with Neptune. Now, Mercury is going to meet with Neptune on the 17th. Um, Mercury Neptune aspects are like Mercury retrograde on steroids, and especially in a sign where Mercury is not terribly happy. Now, he wasn't terribly happy when they met in Pisces. That's not his favorite sign, but he doesn't do terrific in Aries either. Mercury Neptune conjunct in Aries is the tendency to say with force and determination whatever the hell comes into your mind. Right? This is not, don't even trust yourself when it comes to this. Mercury Neptune can get you to buy into a good story, whether or not it has any facts. And in the sign of Aries, boy, is that true, especially at the very beginning of Aries, where the energy is especially strong. So, all I'm saying here is to watch out for communication, watch out that things would be blown out of proportion in a really big way. Now, of course, we know to go back and look at the last time that Mercury conjuncted Neptune, and it wasn't too long ago because prior to his retrograde, they met on March 2nd. Use it in your head to think, well, did anything that began at the beginning of March, and that was a new moon, just after a new moon, anything that began at the beginning of March, any confusion, any lost paperwork, any things that, this is in fact in the US, this is tax week. Tax day is April 15th. And, right in, I can imagine that a lot of people between the situation with Venus and Saturn and the state of the economy and the markets and so on, now that your 401k is gone, you've got to contribute to it by the time that your taxes are due. The missing tax forms. I had missing tax forms, I found out they didn't send. And so all of that kind of stuff go back to March 2nd. I declared the income, of course, but the tax form itself was missing. You go back to March 2nd, things that started around that time that had their next little, let's call it the next little flurry of activity sometime around the eclipse on March 29th and 30th. That was not too long ago. And then now we're going to revisit that. Now, Mercury conjunct Neptune, it is the third hit. It is the last time that they're going to be meeting for a while till next year to aspect each other, but it is not necessarily anything like the end of the story, the end of the situation. It's maybe the last little burst of confusion that you'll have to deal with. But again, paperwork issues, technology issues, miscommunications, transportation snafus. I guess transformation is okay, but not transportation. All of those things really kind of bent out of whack this week. And of course, yeah, the 17th is the day, but 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, Mercury, Neptune, they like to spread themselves out. Neptune is the fog. You're not quite sure when it begins and when it ends. You only know when you're in the midst of it. So we have this kind of we have these meetings that are taking place. We have the next week Venus meets with Saturn to be the end of that story, or the final payoff, let's call it, of that story. We have the Mercury Neptune thing that is going on for quite some time now, and so again, we wouldn't say that these are brand new things that are on the table, and yet everything is a little bit pumped up and out of sight and out of shape. You know what I mean by out of shape? I mean it's like bent out of shape, not like out of shape. Mars now, and throughout this period of time, Mars is going to be leaving Cancer and entering Leo, where he's almost out of the shadow of his retrograde, and at least he's out of Cancer, which is a sign that he doesn't like. He used to be out of bounds, which means beyond the declination that the sun ever gets to. And out of bound planets act erratically and forcefully. So Mars is, he's out, he's back in bounds. He's still in the sign of Cancer, though, and there's a reactivity to Mars in Cancer, right? There's this kind of I gotta protect myself kind of feeling. And or it's in Cancer, we have to protect ourselves. It's a circling the wagons type of energy. And everybody is going to be feeling it. And we have, especially like at the collective level in the midst of the trade war and stuff like that that we have going on here. Every group, every country is feeling that energy and going, oh no, we got to do what we got to do for us. It is Mars in Cancer, very much the opposite of the cooperation. This is more the competition and protectionism. And in fact, the whole trade war thing is itself a reflection of that sort of Mars in Cancer protectionism. And then, well, Mars is going to go into Leo, right? This happens on the 18th, and the 18th, my intuition tells me the 18th is Friday, and I had to check at the calendar. I was pretty sure, but I wanted to check. Mars goes into Leo on the 18th. Now, Mars in Leo, Mars likes being in Leo. It's a fire sign, it's the sun sign. They get along really, really well. But Mars in Leo is also not so much an energy that is about cooperation. It is very, very much about like it's sort of it's the military parade, if you will. It's that kind of display of armaments, not necessarily the energy that we need right now. Um, it's less reactive. It's a less reactive and more active energy. And that just depends upon how you act. And well, there you have it. On Saturday, the 19th, the sun goes into Taurus. And for those of us here in the Northern Hemisphere, that means it's the beginning of spring. Well, not the beginning of spring, it's the middle of spring. It's the real core of spring. In Aries, the plants start showing up. They pop out of the ground. They fight their way through the frost and make their little showing. Some of them, quite a few of them actually, come into bloom. And then in Taurus season, everything turns green and it's lovely. It's a wonderful time. um yeah, the only problem that we have, and it doesn't exactly speak to this week, is that when the sun gets into Taurus, it's going to have to start tangling with planets like Mars and Pluto, and that is what makes next week so significant. It's part of what makes next week so significant. So the energies that we have on us over here are definitely pretty tense. And even if there's nothing new on the table, there are quite a few things that need to be addressed. And so it's a little bit of a mess. As we get to the weekend, we've got quite a bit of activity going on. Some of it is pretty good. Venus will make a nice sextile to Uranus. She's in her favorite sign, and he is in her home sign. I would say that particularly for existing relationships and various matters that are Venusian in nature, this kind of opens up some possibilities for change and easing things around. Even as Mercury sextiles Pluto, remember this is the weekend of the 18th, the 19th and 20th. It seems like there's some possibility there for communication. We can kind of, on a personal level, there we have it. It's going to be a little bit easier. On the other hand, it's also the last quarter moon in Aquarius, and now an Aquarius moon ought to be pretty good. It's good for socializing, it's good for connecting with others. But as it turns out, this last quarter moon is also sort of heating up and lighting up the Sun Pluto square that happens next week. And so I would say that we might be seeing on the collective level quite a bit of tensions uh, sort of before we actually get to the really, really tense aspect. So yeah, I don't think it's a very settled time. And, as I've said many, many times, and you know it, the collective is the outside of us, right? It's not outside of us, it is the outside of us. The collective is and it is the everything outside of your skin eventually has to be considered the collective, and the connections we have with people that are personal to us in our lives are one thing, but we all connect, we all interact with each other. And when the collective tide is shifting and shifting backwards and the energy is getting very tense, we all feel that and it affects our interactions. Personally speaking, I think that the last week, this is the week that began on the 7th, it seemed to have a very, very wonky energy about it all the way through. And I almost want to say that it was an anticipatory energy that will, around the full moon and in this coming week, release itself a little bit. And that might almost be good. And then next week we're going to have to really deal with stuff. Next week is going to be a big one. We'll have to see. I want to say a quick word for those of you that are hanging out this far into the video. Venus's retrograde is over. This year we had a really interesting thing. Venus stepping back, and I've made the point that Lent is, as far as I can see, my guess, my hypothesis is that Lent is the 40 days of Venus retrograde just like knocked onto one particular part of the calendar. Actually, it's the time before Holy Week and Easter, and that floats around the calendar a little bit, but it ties into it ties Venus's retrograde period into a particular part of the calendar, so that you can continue the Venus retrograde energy, but it doesn't have to be about astrology. It can be about something else. This year, it was also Venus's retrograde also coincided with Ramadan. And so we had this sort of triple play of, privation, stepping back from things, not enjoying stuff all that much, avoiding luxuries and so on. And you can do a little recap and see how you did. What I would say is this: if you, to the extent that you did indulge in the extra little bit of pleasure, and it doesn't, I give the example of a luxury item, and I'm not talking about you got to go buy a Chanel bag or something like that. You know, really, it's just, that extra little thing, it might have been the extra pair of shoes from Temu, $5, made by slave labor in China. But, it might be something like that. But it's a small thing, but it's something you don't really need. It's something that's supposed to kind of be feeling good. And then you get it and you don't really feel good. Maybe because the astrology reminds you that it was made by slave labor. But it's that kind of thing. And of course, we're also, because of Venus's retrograde, we're also sorely tempted to do things that are of a luxurious nature. Because when a planet is retrograde, bright in the sky, right? You see it powerful, close to Earth, right? It's powerful. It's just going backwards. That doesn't mean that you should rush out, and buy stuff after the planet goes direct, but you can, but you've had the period to think about it. You've had the period to step back. You've had the period to assess what something means to you and what it would mean to you. If you get it, if you bought it during the retrograde, then it probably didn't meet expectations. If you didn't, then you had the experience of holding back and seeing what that was like. And then going through the process of, gee, I'd like it. It'd be really good. I'd like it. It'd be really good. But not doing it. And that helps us to ground ourselves into our values, into what's really, really important. That's what the retrograde of Mercury, Venus, and Mars do, right? They get us to want stuff that we really aren't gonna, it's not a good time for it. But if we go through that process, we realize, this is what it actually means to me. This is what's important about it. I get these I get these things from the Musician's Friend, I think is the name of the company. And every day they have the stupid deal of the day. And sometimes they have there's some really cool, like a really nice guitar or a really nice something like that. Let's just leave it at that. And ridiculously discounted. And it's just, oh, that looks like it would be so good. Now, I don't need or want a new instrument. I want and need to spend more time practicing the ones I have. But you feel that with the Venus retrograde, and if you can kind of push it away, then it helps you to understand your own motivation. It helps you to understand the value of what you have. And when you eventually do go, but I'm not going to get a guitar, but when you eventually go do it, you can appreciate it more and you know what it really means to you. That's what the whole process is like. If it was tough, if you didn't, if you went and bought the Louis bag or something like that, well, we'll have another Venus retrograde in about a year and a half. Until then, we'll have Lent again next year if you want to play along with that. Just a little closing thought on Venus retrograde. Okay, it's a big week out there. It's a big week. It's going to be kind of messy, and it is pretty much a week that is in anticipation of the following week. So, however much happens this week, and I think things will happen this week, uh, take take heart because next week And I'm not a doom and gloom astrologer, but